Hi, everybody. I know that a lot of you are probably seeing my face for the very first time. Maybe you have heard my voice often. If you are new to the channel, then you're seeing my face and my voice for the first time. So thank you for coming. If you have been listening to me, thank you so much for helping me get to 135,000 subscribers without ever having even seen my face. I do want you to know that I'm a real person and I dress like this every day because I love history. But this isn't about me. Today we're here to talk about Arabella Huntington, the real life inspiration for the character Mrs. Sylvia Chamberlain on HBO's The Gilded Age. HBO's The Gilded Age is another television show that is brilliantly written by Julian Fellows, the creator of Downton Abbey. It's returning for its second season on October 29th, and there is no better place to talk about that show than this channel, Ty's Hot Mess History. I can't think of a better place. Whether or not you watch the show, if you like historical scandals, stay tuned for this episode. I'm covering all of the real life people, places, and events that were depicted in the Gilded Age. But we have to keep in mind that it's a fictional show that's based in reality. The Gilded Age was a real time in history. The Russells and the Van Rijns and the Scotts are fictional families, but they interact with some of the wealthiest and most noteworthy people who did live during the Gilded Age. People like the Vanderbilts, Jay Gould, J.P. Morgan, and T. Thomas Fortune. They also interact with characters who were based on people who existed at that time. One of those characters is Mrs. Chamberlain. On the show, she is portrayed as a woman whose reputation is so bad that proper ladies should not even be seen in the same room as she. They should not speak to her, they should not even look in her direction. For if they do, their own reputations will be in jeopardy. Now that sounds extreme, but that was life in the 1880s. And why was she such a scandal? Because before her husband married her, while he was still married to his first wife, she was his mistress. And to make matters worse, she had a son with her husband. And doing the math, that son was conceived before they were married and while he was still married to his first wife, while his first wife was sick and dying. That's the story of Mrs. Chamberlain. She's based on the real life Arabella Huntington. All of those things were true about her in real life. On the television show, she is also portrayed to be a very rich woman. This was also true about her in real life. Now, I don't know how many seasons there are going to be of The Gilded Age, but I do hope that they go into her story deeply enough and long enough to get to her second husband. They may or may not, but we will get to it today in this episode of Ty's Hot Mess History. Let's get into it. But first, if you like these videos about the most scandalous people from yesteryear who make Ty's Hot Mess History a time capsule for the culture, subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can know every time that I upload one of these videos or every time that I live stream. And hit that like button to support this video. Thank you. Now, on to why you are here. Arabella Huntington is the real-life inspiration for the Gilded Age character Mrs. Chamberlain, who is played by Jean Triplehorn. From this point on in her story, I will stop referencing the HBO TV show. If you watch the show, then you know which character I'm talking about. If you don't watch the show, that's just fine. The real-life story of Arabella Huntington is better than fiction, and you don't need to follow that TV show to follow this video. Arabella Huntington was one of the richest women in the country in her adult life, but she grew up poor and without a father. She made a name and a fortune for herself at a time when only men were able to make such moves. She married a man who knew how to make money, and she knew how to spend it. And I don't mean that she knew how to spend money in the typical sense, like when you think of a housewife who's married to a really wealthy man and she just spends his cash as quickly as he can earn it. No, what I mean is that she had a really good sense for business. She purchased items that appreciated in value like real estate and art. She had one of the finest art collections in the country. She had every reason to be proud of herself, but she lived a great deal of her life in shame. and that had a lot to do with her son. She loved him, but times were different then. It was the late 1800s, and he was born out of wedlock. Her bundle of joy, her bouncing baby boy, was born a secret that she needed to keep. And from the moment that he was conceived, Era spent the rest of her life lying about the timeline of his existence in an effort to legitimize his birth to her high society circles that never really accepted her as one of them. But we'll get back to her son's birth. Here's what we know about her birth. Arabella was born around the year 1850. Remember, this is a time when birth records weren't exactly a top priority, and it was even less of a priority if you were a girl. Her parents were Richard and Catherine Yarrington. Arabella was born in Alabama, and that's where she lived with her family until her father died when she was about 9 years old. This left her mother, Catherine, in a tough position. You see, Arabella was just one of 5 children, so Catherine had to make some money to feed all of her babies, and she came up with a plan that worked. She opened a boarding house in Richmond, Virginia. Fast forward about 10 years. The man who would be Arabella's first husband crosses paths with her at her mother's boarding house. His name was Collis Huntington. He was part of what was called California's Big Four. That referred to the Big Four railroad company barons. Not only was Collis Huntington a part of the Big Four, he was the dominant member and the founder of Southern Pacific Railroad. Well, in 1869, he went to Washington, D.C. to lobby for federal money for a rail line going south from San Francisco. Now, this is the age of the robber baron. Here's how Oxford Languages defines robber baron: a person who has become rich through ruthless and unscrupulous business practices. Originally with references to prominent U.S. businessmen in the late 19th century. And Collis Huntington certainly fit this bill. And this is likely why he was the dominant member of the Big Four. On his lobbying trip in D.C., he fooled the members of Congress to get the money that he wanted. So he was asking for money to lay miles and miles of railroad track. And of course, it costs less to lay track over flat land than it does land that's going through mountain ranges. But Collis wanted to squeeze as much money as he could out of the government, so he presented fake maps of California, showing them mountain ranges that did not exist. Why? Because it cost twice as much to lay tracks in the mountains. Now we're talking the late 1800s here, a time when it wasn't really a common thing to take business trips to go and survey land, especially almost clear across the country. Anyway, his request got approved. He got all of the money that he wanted, which was a lot more than he needed for his project. And where did that extra money go? Right into his fat pockets. And after all of that lying to get his hands on some dough, a fellow's got a rest. And Collis Huntington rested at Catherine Yarrington's boarding house, Arabella's mom's place. And that is where he met his future wife, Arabella Yarrington, who would become Arabella Huntington if Collis got his way. And he usually did get his way. This was another one of those times that he got his way, eventually. But there were 2 obstacles in the way: John Worsham and Elizabeth Stoddard. John Worsham was the man who Arabella was dating. He ran a gambling parlor that Collis likely visited on his stay in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, some rumors went as far as saying that Arabella was married to John Worsham. That may or may not be true. But one thing that is true is that at that time that she was his girl, he was also a married man. Which brings us to the other obstacle to the Collis Huntington-Arabella union, Elizabeth Stoddard. She was Collis Huntington's wife. But let's be real. Arabella obviously was no stranger to being with married men, and good old Collis didn't seem to be too concerned about his own wife. Roughly 9 months after Arabella met Collis, she had a son. There was always gossip about who the father was. Was it Worsham? The rumor was that After she got pregnant with Worsham's child, he left her, then went back to his wife. Or was Collis actually the father? It's hard to know, because she gave her son Worsham's last name. But is that something that she did just to keep scandal away from Collis Huntington's name? I truly don't know, because this woman lived her life telling one lie to cover up the next one for years. But what is known for certain is that after she became pregnant, regardless of who the child's father was, Collis Huntington took her to Texas, where she stayed for most of her pregnancy. She gave birth to her son in Texas. His name was Archer Milton Worsham, and after he was born, Collis paid for mother and son to move to New York City to live in a beautiful home that just happened to be very close to his own Park Avenue home, the home that he shared with the obstacle, Elizabeth's daughter. She was Collis Huntington's wife, who was dying of cancer, while he was trying to figure out how to be closer to his new 19-year-old lover. And I guess that I can just throw this in before we get in much more deeply. So we have the theories about which man actually fathered her son. Well, her son, when he became an adult, threw his own theory into the pile. He preferred the thought that the wealthy railroad tycoon was his father, even though he had the last name of the other man. He contended that Collis took Arabella to New York to care for his invalid wife, and then, after that, the two fell in love and later conceived a child who was himself. It still doesn't make his parents seem like great people, but at least that way, it's the rich man's blood that is flowing through his veins in his version of the story. When Arabella arrived in New York City, she added another lie to her resume. She fashioned herself as the young widow of Worsham. And it's not like she was well enough known for anyone to be able to fact check her story, so it worked for a while. And I won't say that she taught Collis Huntington how to lie. He clearly knew how to tell lies, really good ones, as we can recall from his stunt to get more money out of the United States Congress. But he did join in on Arabella's lies about who she was and how she knew him. 7 years after he moved Arabella to Manhattan to live under his wife's nose, he took Arabella to Texas on a couples trip. But he told everybody that she was his niece. And their age difference certainly made that seem like a believable lie. After all, he was 30 years older than Arabella. But depending on what you value in life, you may say that her lies were worth it. I mean, she was a girl who grew up really poor, but as an adult, she was someone who would never know poverty again because all of the lies that she told put herself in a position to get a very wealthy man to spend a lot of money on her. And he spent a lot of money on her, and he gave her a lot of money to spend, and she seemed to spend it really wisely. It's funny. He used to actually brag about how he never spent more than $200 on anything that he would wear. But when it came to Arabella, the sky was the limit. He showered her with everything that he could, and he loved to give her expensive jewels. But remember, she didn't just take money and just take things from him. She learned how to make money, and she was good at it. She took it upon herself to learn about real estate. She learned how to buy and sell high-end properties. As a matter of fact, J.D. Rockefeller bought one of the homes that she renovated to sell. She also learned about buying and selling stocks, and she made a fortune off of that too. Perhaps she thought that Collis would get tired of her one day and trade her in for an even younger mistress, so she'd better get all that she could while the getting was good. But he was in it for the long haul. That is, after his wife died. And his wife, Elizabeth's daughter, died in 1884, allowing Arabella to step up from the role of the side chick to official wife. They say you can't turn a hoe into a housewife. Well, Collis Huntington begs to differ. As if this couple's story wasn't scandalous enough by itself with just the two of them, the reverend who officiated their wedding ceremony led a life that was so scandalous that perhaps he was the only one fit to bless this mess. He was Reverend Henry Ward Beecher. He was the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of the American classic Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, Reverend Beecher had only one wife, but he had a long string of mistresses, and they were bold. They would come to watch him preach in church every Sunday. A new mistress, sitting there next to the church's first lady, his wife. After the wedding, the couple moved into his Fifth Avenue home. They had the money and the mansion, but their scandalous reputations made it impossible to join the ranks of high society. The Astors were the gatekeepers, and they would not let them pass through. They couldn't get into the ballrooms of the Astors or the Vanderbilts, who were fairly new to high society themselves. Though they couldn't get into the ballrooms of the Astors or the Vanderbilts, that didn't stop the Huntingtons from enjoying their life and their money, and they had lots of it. Arabella got Collis into purchasing art, and she built one of the most impressive collections in the world. In the year 1900, Collis died while he was on vacation. He was 78 years old, and he left most of his fortune, two-thirds of it, to his wife, Arabella, about $150 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's like having $5 billion today in 2023. His death left her one of the richest women on the planet. Well, she only got two-thirds of his fortune. What about the other third? That went to Collis's favorite nephew, Henry Huntington. And guess what else he got that belonged to his deceased uncle? His wife. Yes, Arabella married Henry Huntington, her husband's nephew, which means that she married her own nephew. It was by marriage, but still, that was her nephew. If he was her husband's nephew, he was her nephew too. Handling all the arrangements for Collis's estate brought them closer together at a time when it just so happened that Henry found himself being more distant from his own wife. You heard that correctly. Arabella had once again moved in on another lady's husband. But hey, the blame isn't all on her. It takes two to tango, and he was the one who had made the commitment to his wife. Anyway, Arabella and Henry Huntington got married right after he divorced his wife. I guess just to give her a point, I should mention that even though she was his aunt, there was no big age gap. Remember, she was much younger than her first husband, and the nephew and she were roughly the same age, either born the same year or just 1 year apart. And he had a palace built for her in California that was bigger and more luxurious than anything that she had ever known in Manhattan. And Arabella Huntington lived a bi-coastal life until she passed away in 1924, making herself a scandal from sea to shining sea. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. Doing something a little bit different here. I will go on and build a proper historical set so that I can come on camera and you can see that I'm not an AI. I'm a real girl, a real woman who loves history. I have a little more information on Arabella Huntington. If you want to hear about her tabloid scandal, let me know and I'll come on here at a later date and talk about that with you. Just let me know in the comment section. And I know that there are some other scandals that I need to get back to, like doing sequels on, and I will pick them up, especially with the Titanic series. There are some that I have promised and that I will do. If you enjoy these scandals about the real people from the Gilded Age, you might want to check out my video about Stanford White, the architect to the nouveau riche who led a very scandalous life. You can see it here, and I will leave a link to it in the description box. My sources for this story are the Los Angeles Times Archives 1899, 1900, and 2000, and the Huntington Library Art Collections. This video has been brought to you by me. Well, my Patreon is a sponsor for this video. If you like these dirty scandals on my channel, then you'll love my Patreon, Ties to Hot Mess History. It has all of the stuff that I can't talk about or show here because it's just too hot, too violent, too sexual, too graphic, too much. Come and join us there for the hot mess history. The link is in the description box.